Loud. Dang. Okay, recording in progress. If you're watching this recording, I introduced our team and talked about housekeeping and then remembered I hadn't started the recording. I'm very sorry. All right, so with that, off to Jenny.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim.
Oops,
good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Jordan, and while I'm new to healthcare policy and financing, or HCPF, I've had 20 years of experience in the intellectual and developmental disability, or IDD, field. Employment for people with disabilities has been an unwavering passion of mine. And for those of you I have not met yet, I look forward to our paths crossing and the potential of future partnerships. I am thrilled to be working on the rollout of these new benefits, and I'm glad you're here to inform our work. So let's go ahead and get started with some high-level background. Next slide. So Colorado, it became an employment-first state in 2016. The basic premise is that all people, including those with significant disabilities, can work. Some people may need more support than others, and today we're going to be discussing some new support options. Employment first means that the opportunity to work for competitive wages is provided as the first and primary option by taxpayers, or by taxpayer-funded programs. But first and primary option does not mean it is the only option or that people are forced into it. Rather, if a person expresses an interest in working, that it is a real option for them, and the involved state entities are tasked with removing systematic barriers. While Colorado has some good practices in place, we still have areas for improvement. Our hope is that some of the changes we will be discussing today will help address some of the gaps that we have identified. Next slide. So one of the major factors driving these changes, as Kim mentioned, is the Senate Bill 21039. It was a bipartisan bill passed June of 2021 that championed the end of subminimum wage practices in Colorado. Many groups from around the state came together to promote this legislation, such as the Employment First Advisory Partnership, EFAP, Alliance, ARC. It was a bill that came from the ground up and involved many of you here today, and we thank you for those efforts. The legislation specifically tasked HCPF to add services that would address line-of-sight supervision and ongoing benefits counseling. It called out the need for a buy-in option to be available to people enrolling in the developmental disability waiver. Also, HCPF must seek to allow job coaching and job development to be authorized without regard to an individual's individual service limit. Now, this all is very energizing. I hope you're feeling it too. The focus, as Kim mentioned, of this series of meetings is to seek your input on the development of these new services. Since the legislature specifically directed HCPF to pursue services that address line of sight and benefits counseling as an extension of current supported employment benefits, and that they set the deadline of 2023, those are the services that we're going to be addressing today. Both of the new services will be added to the DD waiver and the supported living services, or SLS waiver, beginning July 1st of 2023. Next slide. So let's take a look at benefits planning. We anticipate this service will be more straightforward, particularly because there is a parallel service that is currently available through the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, DVR. Next slide. So let's dive in. The purpose of benefits planning is to assist members, their families, and support networks to understand how benefits may be affected by employment. Benefits could include supplemental security income, SSI, Medicaid, Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, Medicare, food stamps, housing assistance, and other federal, state, and local benefits. These systems can be complicated to navigate, and there may be concerns about how having an income or an increase in income could cause problems with benefits. We know that many members and families can be hesitant to pursue employment because of the apparent risk of losing those benefits. After so much time and energy goes into getting support in place, it can be scary to think about putting all that at risk. We think that having someone who is highly trained, readily available to help navigate options will be invaluable. Next slide. Having this information understanding even before someone starts their job search could be life-changing. Our hope is that people will be empowered to pursue employment. They will be able to make informed decisions by having accurate information and guidance about the impact of income on their individual situation. Benefits planning will be available to any member enrolled in the DD and SLS waivers. And by having this benefit available, they can learn what they can do to work and maintain necessary supports and keep their established safety net in place. Now, next slide. Okay, now for the proposed provider qualifications. Benefits planners must have one of the following criteria or certifications, rather. The first two listed are offered through the Virginia Commonwealth University, the Community Work Incentive Coordinator, and the Community Partner Work Incentive Coordinator. And then the third one listed, the Credentialed Work Incentive Practitioner, is offered through Cornell University. To obtain these certifications, there's a rigorous training program, and then there must be a demonstration of competency. The content is a deep dive into Social Security disability benefits, Medicaid and Medicare, as well as other public benefits. Our proposed qualifications are consistent with the current DVR vendor requirements. Similar to all other waiver services, it must be prior authorized in the service plan and on the PAR. And as a reminder, case managers must have a conversation with the member before adding a service. It can't just be the provider calling up and requesting that it get added to the plan. That individual is going to be involved in that process. Providers must be an enrolled waiver benefit planning provider. We anticipate that this will be a new specialty that an existing waiver provider can add through the provider portal. Next slide. So what are we thinking will be included under benefits planning? Well, some activities that are common within the benefits counseling realm, things like the benefits verification or benefits summary and analysis. It also could include assisting members in exploring possible options to access necessary services and supports if they are working or if they decide to work. This could include information about waivers, about buy-in program for working adults with disabilities, work incentives, and other programs. One aspect that we are most excited about is that it could be accessed prior to employment and after they have a job and maybe offered more hours or a raise. We want to promote career advancement as that can easily be overlooked for individuals with IDD. Next slide. Another component of the service that we are excited about proposing is that benefits planners could help submit and connect individuals to resources. This could include coordinating with other team members and assisting with referrals to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, or DVR. We are also thinking about working in a component where the benefits planner could help with the collecting and submission of income statements or other documentation that might be needed by the Social Security Administration or other benefits managing entities. Next slide. So benefits planning through the waiver is intended to be used when benefits counseling provided by the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, or DVR, is unavailable. We need to ensure we are tapping into that resource prior to accessing it through the waiver, since, as you know, the waiver is the payer of last resort. We'll dig in a little bit more on this on the next slide. Now, benefits planning won't be in the waivers until July 1st of 2023. However, if you're excited about this option, and like, this is a great thing, how can I access it? Great news is that folks can access benefits counseling now through DVR. And our sources at DVR express that they're eager to get people connected with this service. Even if someone's DVR case was recently closed successfully, you can call the DVR counselor and they might be able to cover it. So let's take a look at how benefits planning will interplay with DVR on the next slide. All right. So as you can see by this graphic, benefits planning through the waiver will be available to people who do not have a job or may not be seeking employment. They can access it anytime. We anticipate that this benefit is posed to serve a large portion of the adult IDD population who are not working yet. We hope that this could be a natural gateway to robust conversations about employment. Now, if a person is connected to DVR, then they can access benefits counseling through that means. We anticipate that many of the providers who will be approved as waiver benefits planners will also be on the list that DVR uses for referrals. Our understanding is that DVR can approve benefits counseling prior to establishing a vocational goal. So it can be accessed sooner than some of the other DVR services. Additionally, if the individual's case was deemed a successful closure, they may be able to return to DVR to request benefits counseling if certain criteria are met. If the individual is or was recently served by DVR, it's worth checking in to see if DVR can cover benefits counseling. And as mentioned before, this is now available through DVR. Benefits planning through the waiver is also a service available to members who are employed, provided that DVR is determined not to be an option. We know that often when a job offer or a promotion or an increase in wages or hours is being offered, that's a time-sensitive thing. Our hope is that members can quickly get the support that they need to make that important decision. So as an aside, kind of pro tip, some of the options available to members is likely more nuanced than just stay under X amount to keep your benefits. Like, don't make more than this much. So if you've heard that before and you want to know more, benefits planners can help. Next slide. Okay, so now that we have covered benefits planning in broad strokes, we are interested in your feedback and input. So what questions do you have? For those of you who have been thinking about this service, does what was shared align with what you were thinking? Is there anything that we are missing, or do you have concerns? You can also share thoughts or questions into the chat or the QA. You can raise your hand and unmute. And we've got a couple of about 15 to 20 minutes that we can kind of dive into this before jumping into the next section of the presentation. All right.
Hey, Jenny, I see Tom rose his hand.
All right, Tom.
Hey, thank you. I was having trouble getting all this in the chat. It just wasn't going to work. One, I think it's great that that people who aren't employed can access or access the waiver services directly. My question is around the timeliness part. Are you guys viewing this kind of the way you guys conduct the braided services with DVR, like in the sense that, hey, if you've got a request in for the service at DVR and you've got a response back, where you can show that you attempted to access that first, is that the same kind of dynamic you're expecting to see here with benefits planning being accessed through HCPF versus DVR? And if not, then what are the other stipulations around timeliness that would have a factor in whether or not you could use that service?
No, great question, Tom. So obviously, if it's before DVR is involved, you could access that through the waiver. So again, really looking at that as that gateway. Let's get the conversations started. For those folks that have a job and might have that promotion kind of on the line, yes, that kind of braiding, see what you can do, check in with DVR. If the DVR counselor's not able to add it right away for whatever reason, or there's some sort of issue, that's where we want the waiver to be able to pop in so that person can get that support. So does that answer?
Yeah, that absolutely does. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great.
Hey, Jenny, I see that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Please, Katie, help manage the chat.
Yeah,
for us.
I was gonna say, I see that John has raised his hand, but then we have a couple questions in the chat too.
All right. So go ahead, John, and then Katie, if you don't mind reading the chat out or help directing that.
My question would be, will these benefit counselors be knowledgeable about the Medicaid buy-in and ABLE accounts, managing assets and managing income with the Medicaid buy-in? That would be, I think, a crucial point too. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, John. Yes, we are hoping that the benefits planners can have some Colorado specific knowledge. So those are some of the areas that we want to be collecting and seeing what, in addition to getting those certifications, what like local knowledge might they need to have to be really successful. But our hope is that they would be knowledgeable about the waivers, have an insight into the buy-in, so to be able to help those folks navigate.
Does that answer your question, John?
Sorry, I muted myself again. Yes, thank you.
Great. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, and I see that Jennifer Biggs had a question that Kim has responded to in chat, but Margaret had a question about how do you become a provider for benefits counseling for people on the waiver program and are not connected to DVR? I am a certified CPWIC, which I'm so sorry, I don't know the whole acronym for that. I know I should, but I do know it's a very cool certification. So congrats, Margaret. And receives referrals from DVR.
So
yeah, I just popped an answer to that in the chat too just now. Sorry, that one took me a second. But since these are just proposed services right now, once we sort of go through the process of finalizing the service, getting it submitted to CMS and approved, then we'll share out information to the community about how to get signed up as a waiver provider.
Yeah, at this point, what we're, the current thinking is that benefits planners would need to be a Medicaid provider and have that designation, and then they could add. So if you're an existing PASA, you could just add it. If you're not currently connected to a PASA, then you would want to either become a PASA or get connected to a Medicaid provider, program approved service agency, in that vein.
So I do have a question to clarify. What is a PASA?
So sorry, program approved service agency. So it would be a Medicaid approved provider that would be like currently connected with the intellectual and developmental disability waivers.
Thank you.
Okay, Jenny, I think so. Right now, that's all the questions we're seeing.
No, great. Really appreciate all of like your thoughts and your feedbacks. We do have like a question, a Google form kind of poll sort of thing that we'll be sending out that can give you an additional time to kind of weigh in. I do see like the chat, and thank you, Jennifer, for the question. It's similar to, I think, Tom's in terms of that sequencing and moving things quickly. It could be a situation if you are knowing, hey, there might be something coming up for this person about a promotion, you could go ahead and start having that conversation with the case manager and adding it to the service plan. And then when that official offer comes through, then you could be connected with that benefits planner to move forward. Tom, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I was just thinking again, as you guys were talking about it, is there, and I'm sure there will be, right? But frequency, right, is a big thing. You know, benefit, like to you guys' point, right? Like benefits planning through somebody's career could happen, need to happen multiple times, even over a year. If, let's say, as an example, that somebody's going to be experiencing a raise through maybe minimum wage rate increase, that's going to impact their earnings. But then maybe 6 months later, they're up for a promotion, which is going to increase it again, which could change things. So I'm assuming HCPF's going to have a limit on how many times that could be accessed in a year or in a plan year or something. But do you guys have, and I may be putting the cart before the horse, but is there a general idea on the frequency or the limits that may be put on that service as far as frequency?
No, thank you for raising that, Tom. Definitely something that's on our mind, and because we're so early on and there's like a lot of different factors that are going to be influencing some of those like limit settings, our hope and intention is to make it as open, as flexible as we can. So that's the mindset, because we want people to be able to access it and to access it when they need it. And so we're going to try not to put too many loopholes or limitations on it if we can.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, Paige.
Hey there, just a note, I am coming from an agency that was providing benefits counseling, and it is an awesome service that is so needed. So I'm really excited to hear this. Just a note for anybody thinking of providing it, I would start looking at the process of getting someone trained now, because it is quite an arduous undertaking, and it's difficult. Like, it's definitely not one of those trainings that you can just like pay attention to. It's a lot of work, and it takes a while. So if we're able to start providing in July, I definitely encourage folks to start looking at training people soon.
No, thank you for that insight, Paige. and definitely true. And I think there's a couple different components that might need to come into play. And I see Nikki had entered some things into the chat as well. So like you would need to have that certification either through the Virginia Commonwealth University or Cornell. And then you also would need to be an approved Medicaid provider. So you would need to have kind of both of those things in place. It's not set up in the system yet, but eventually we'll have it. You could add that specialty to your provider application for existing providers, or you could become a provider, and that process also takes time if you're wanting to just open up your own kind of Medicaid provider entity for this. Both of those things could take time. It'll take a little bit coming up into July before those things will be available in the system for you to select. And Kim, if you have any insights, if I said that weird, please let me know. Dakota. Dakota, you there? I see your hand raised.
Yeah, not hearing Dakota for some reason.
Hello.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, sorry. So there was a bullet point that said benefit counselors would assist with collection and submission of information to Social Security, like pay stubs and such. Can you just kind of elaborate on what you guys kind of envision that to be or even look like for benefits counselors? And then side question, this might be jumping the gun, but have you guys talked about like reimbursement rate as well for the service?
Oh, great questions. So tackling, I'm going to start with the reimbursement, and it looks like in the chat as well, there's some questions. So we are anticipating it would be a 15-minute increment reimbursement. Before we can have a rate to publish and share with you all, our rates team would need to do an evaluation. And one of the things that we were discussing as a team is that we might have another stakeholder meeting specifically related to rates, because a lot of times what the rates team needs to know is what does it take to actually deliver this service, help us to understand what infrastructure, what training, like what would it do to keep the lights on, like those sorts of things. So we would definitely want provider input to help inform that process that then would inform the rates. And just noticing Jennifer's comment, yes, we are putting forward DVR's rate as a, hey, this currently exists. Let's hope that we can come to that same space, but that's the mindset that we have. Related to the document collection, would love thoughts on this, but from what I understand is that can be one of the challenges for folks is that they need to fill out applications or they need to be reporting to Social Security. And one of the challenges might be in tracking down those pay stubs. Like maybe the person has been working and has been fairly independent and maybe wasn't keeping their pay stubs. And so we're having to chase things back. That's something that we're envisioning that perhaps the benefits planners might be able to help and track down. And then give suggestions to that person and team of like, what kinds of things do you need to keep? Maybe here's an idea and suggestions of a system that you could put into place so you have what you need for future times. Dakota, is that kind of get at what you're at, or what are you thinking or hoping for out of document collection, or should we not pursue that?
I like the idea of some of it. I mean, I am a benefits counselor and we do, help assist and provide that, information to our individuals. I just think with current caseloads and stuff, just reflecting, it would be hard for me to even reach out to an employer to try and track down pay stubs and stuff like that. But interesting, yes.
I definitely appreciate that feedback. And I think what we're envisioning is that there's the core responsibilities, and then that document collection could be like, could include or may include, but not trying to infer that everybody can just turn in all their documents to the benefits planner and they'll take care of it, because I don't think that's reasonable. Katie, how are things in the chat? Any other questions that we want to bring up?
I think we're all up to date right now, Jenny.
All right. Any other thoughts, questions? Are we missing anything? Other things that you would hope that we would be considering in the development of benefits planning?
Hey, Jenny, this is Katie. I just wanted to make a quick plug that I'm going to put in the chat a benefits guide that Colorado ABSI made. I'm not sure it's the most up-to-date one, so we will make sure that gets onto our supported employment website here at HCPF. I just wanted to explain I'm putting that in too.
Fantastic. Thank you, Katie. No, it's a very exciting kind of service prospect. And again, we love hearing your input and feedback. So we're going to be including my contact information, Kim's contact information as part of the slide deck. So we'll get that out to you all. So if you have ideas that come up kind of after the fact or questions, please reach out. We love to hear kind of what you're thinking and what we want to make this work and not just be a benefit that's on paper. So with that, Kim, I might turn it over to you and we can get into workplace assistance.
All right. I am not sad to have 5 extra minutes we're doing great on time, which I'm thrilled about. And I have a feeling that the discussion around workplace assistance might be sort of even more lively. So I'm glad we get a little extra time. So thank you. Just want to echo Jenny, all of you, for your input on the benefits planning. We're moving along to talk about workplace assistance, and just for sort of purposes of clarification, this is the sort of name title we're currently using for the benefit that we envision will meet the line of sight service need from the legislation. So if you're like, what do you mean workplace assistance? I thought we were talking about line of sight. We are. So for this service, I want to start with the language from the legislation itself, because I think it's helpful for understanding how we reached our current view of what this service could be. So in Senate Bill 21039, the legislature tasked HCPF with creating options for people with line of sight supervision, specifically developing a service that provides support to provide line of sight supervision on the job as a less intensive and less expensive alternative to individual job coaching when appropriate, which is very jargony, but in other words, we were directed to develop a service that better supports members who have a rights modification that requires line of sight supervision. Right now, we know that many people with these rights modifications want to work. And while there are some options available, oh God, my tiny dog is gonna bark in the background. So sorry, everyone. She was so quiet this whole time. While we have some options to provide that support now, they aren't working super well. And we know that these folks face a significant barrier to working independently. But in thinking about this directive and this language in the legislation, our interpretation is that if we design a service to meet this specific need, it could also address some of the other barriers that we know many of our members face when considering their employment goals. So specifically, we know folks who have medical or physical assistance needs during the day, or who have higher supervision levels that are not line of sight, or maybe other behavioral support needs, also face significant barriers to working independently in the community. So in general, right, when we think about employment first, and these are the groups that come up most often, right? Like if I'm out talking with providers or talking with folks who receive supported employment services or want to pursue a career, we know that these are the groups that struggle the most to be able to access the employment opportunities that they want, that they're interested in. And so we recognize that the system isn't set up well to support these folks. And our hope is that a service designed to support people with line of sight supervision will also help open things up for these other groups and reduce barriers sort of across the board to employment. Isn't this a fun graphic? Jenny made this and I like it a lot. So our goal is to give teams another tool in their toolbox of sort of supports in addition to job coaching, right? So right now, if you're a job coach, if you're a member of someone's team trying to figure out how to help them get the tools and resources they need at work, we have natural supports and we have technology that we can use to access employment and increase independence at work. But for people facing the most barriers, we know that these existing tools, job coaching, natural supports, and technology aren't enough, right, to make employment as accessible as it should be. And so we're hoping that adding workplace assistance as another tool will sort of address this missing piece. An important sort of difference between this service and benefits planning, we talked a little bit about how it already exists at DVR, benefits planning exists in a lot of other states. This idea, this workplace assistance, is something that really is new. So we've looked at services in other states, and while there are some states that have something similar, ours will be unique. And so we'll really need to craft something completely new to meet Colorado's needs. I know I'm sort of being a little repetitive, bear with me, but I want to sort of ground us in what our purpose is in developing this service and sort of the philosophy that we're trying to follow as we're thinking about it, in part to make sure that this resonates with you and that as you all think about this opportunity, there's alignment here in like what we're trying to accomplish and in how we're trying to accomplish it. So the purpose of this service is to increase access to competitive integrated employment for members with the most significant barriers, including rights modifications related to supervision, physical support needs, medical needs, other behavioral needs. And while we're targeting this specific group, we want to be sure that decisions around whether to use this service once it's approved and like how long to use it and how often are still person-centered services and person-centered decisions. I think it's important for all of us to just keep in mind and remember that having a paid caregiver at work can be invasive, right? It sort of almost inherently accentuates someone's disability or their differentness. And that's especially true if someone is sort of just hanging out and watching over you. And so while we're super excited to have this as an option and we're really excited to help support more people in going to work, I just want to be sort of upfront that we're thinking about this as something that should only be used when needed, and whether or not it's needed should be evaluated regularly. So with that in mind, here's how we're envisioning the service delivery sort of in practice. So it would be a one-to-one service taking place primarily at the member's place of employment, either during work hours or before or after work hours. So some examples of what before or after work might look like could be assisting with physical or medical needs, and an example of how it might be sort of outside of the place of employment would be providing transportation for someone who has line of sight supervision, for example. But in general, it's all sort of like adjacent to and related to getting to work, being at work, being successful at work, getting home. Someone receiving workplace assistance, in many cases, will probably also be receiving job coaching. They may not, right? There might be folks who are completely independent in their actual job, and what they really need is assistance, physical assistance during the day or supervision support. And maybe they only require workplace assistance. But in cases where the member receives both job coaching and workplace assistance, we're envisioning that those services could be provided by the same provider or the same agency or by different agencies, sort of according to that individual's preference and the availability of providers in that area, etc. So again, I'm like really harping on this, who is it for? But while we want this service to be available to more than just people with a rights modification requiring line of sight supervision, we are still envisioning this to be fairly sort of narrowly targeted to specific groups of members with specific barriers and needs that aren't being met by the current system. So the first of those is anyone who has physical or medical support needs during the day. And we have some examples here of sort of what that might look like. And then in addition to those with physical support or medical needs, this service would also be for people whose behavioral support needs are sort of essentially greater than what the natural supports in the workplace could reasonably support. So again, that would include people with rights modifications related to supervision, which includes line of sight, but could also include limited alone time or other situations where there are higher supervision needs in a certain setting. One thing I want to be really clear about is that someone's supervision level under this scenario, right? If this service gets approved, we have workplace assistance. We are not envisioning that someone's supervision level should be increased in order to either access the service or to go to work. In some conversations around this, I've heard some confusion about this point, and I think there's been some concern that offering this service might inadvertently incentivize teams to increase supervision to get access to it. We definitely don't want that. And that is one of the reasons that we don't want to develop something that's limited to line of sight. So last note about supervision is that our hope really is that workplace assistance can maybe be a bridge for folks who might ultimately need less supervision or support, behavioral support at work. And I'm like preaching to the choir here, I know, but the natural supports available at work have regular opportunities to get to know and interact with and support our members. And that's really different than most community settings, right? And so as a general reminder, waiver services aren't intended to supplant natural supports or be provided at a level or intensity that's not aligned with the member's ability to be independent. And so as we're thinking about just sort of supervision in general and what supervision at work looks like for some folks, just remember that work can and often should be treated differently than maybe other settings. And my last sort of quick point on that is that appropriate job match can also control for a lot of concerns that individuals or their teams might have about going to work. So we want workplace assistance to be available as a tool, but that shouldn't sort of supersede like making good job matches, building really quality natural supports. All right, believe it or not, now it's time for discussion. So I want to open it up for discussion, questions, and concerns. But one point I want to just sort of make before we dive in is that I know that from talking with many of you, that there are lots of questions about the practicalities of how this service could be delivered like in real life, in the real world. And we are running a little bit ahead of time. So if we have time, we can start to get into those. But I also just want to assure everyone that our plan is to make the focus of the next stakeholder meeting more of the like nitty-gritty of like, okay, this exists. How do we use it? How do we make sure it actually functions in the world? For today, as I mentioned earlier, our main goal is to make sure that we're on the right page and moving in the right direction with respect to the needs that you all see in the community and at that sort of like more 10,000 foot view level, and sort of check ourselves on that before we like really get into the grind of like, okay, but what's the difference between this and job coaching and those kinds of questions. So with that caveat of sorts, what are your thoughts? Is this sort of same prompts as Jenny? Is this what you were expecting? If this is something that you've been thinking about, what questions do you have, concerns, feedback? And I saw
Tim, I
Katie.
might get us rolling here real quick.
Yeah.
If you do want to unmute, that's great. Just raise your hand. That helps us keep track. But Jennifer Biggs had a couple things in the chat. One was in regard to personal care. Do we think this will help with if somebody needs support in the bathroom or something like that? And another thing that Jennifer mentioned is she can really see how this could be empowering for somebody to strengthen their natural supports. But that's all.
Absolutely. I think with respect to personal care, we're sort of considering that as under the umbrella of physical supports. And Katie, you used this phrasing the other day, so I'm going to use it because I really like it. Helping people with their sort of personal needs at work as opposed to their job needs at work. And so I would consider personal care sort of subsumed within that. And then I love the comment about this sort of bridge to more natural supports, because it can feel scary, right? To be like, yeah, like they'll get to know their coworkers and it'll be totally fine. Don't worry about it. I think it feels a little bit more supportive and accessible to be like, okay, we know that there are these specific needs. We believe that with the right job match, we can develop quality, robust, natural supports to help with some personal needs, right? But we can take like a half step in between so that it doesn't feel like this giant leap of scary faith that you're going to go out and be vulnerable, right? And hope your coworkers are going to be cool.
This is Paige Gallagher, Jewish Family Service. I guess, you know, workforce makes me feel concerned. But is there maybe a way that this could be provided in like short term, you know, like maybe somebody's not like actively involved in the entire shift and they're just there for support when needed, like kind of a more background. And would there way to, you know, is there a way to kind of transition folks into not needing that support at some point? Where does group supported employment fit into this? Is that going to go away at some point totally?
Yeah, I'm going to let me know if I miss one of your questions, but I'm going to take those, I think, hopefully mostly in order. Definitely share your concern about workforce, right? Like that, I think when I was sitting in the provider seat, I was like, this is great. Who's going to do it? That's maybe a little bit of a separate problem, but a related problem, right? Because if we don't have the people to provide the service, then what are we doing? But I do think this sort of what you're describing, where it's like on a smaller basis, that is sort of what we're thinking, right? That for any individual who's thinking or whose team is like, all right, we're ready to work, we've got job coaching supports, okay, but we need this other assistance. Is workplace assistance the right tool for us? That there should be a conversation around like, is this someone with line of sight who needs someone there the whole shift? Or is it someone who like maybe only needs assistance for 30 minutes, an hour out of their, let's say, 5-hour shift? And this is sort of where we start to get into the difficulties of like, okay, well, but practically, how do you staff having someone come for 1 hour? That's challenging, right? I don't want to pretend that that's not challenging, but I think conceptually, yes, it could be, maybe you have one person who's sort of bebopping around your town, stopping by different work sites and helping people out. And then, but they're only with any one individual for a short period of time. Again, I know that sort of starts to stray into the like, okay, but how do we actually do this? But I do think it can be as extensive in terms of like the amount of time someone is receiving workplace assistance, or as limited as is right for that member, at least in terms of the sort of concept of the service. And then for group employment, which I think that is the last of the questions, but if I missed one, let me know.
No, you're great. Thank you.
Yeah. So right now, this service is intended to be a one-to-one service for people who are accessing independent employment and in competitive integrated employment. And that's primarily because in group employment, there is generally this sort of full-time staff already associated with that program and then is already available to provide that workplace assistance. And so I think what we're hoping is that for folks who maybe are in group employment now, maybe I'm hoping, I shouldn't speak for my whole team probably, but if there are people who are in group employment who want to work independently, but don't feel that they have that option because they need that staff support, that this is a way for them to pursue that as an opportunity. But it isn't intended to make group employment go away. That's not been a conversation as part of this implementation or part of this legislation.
Awesome. Yeah, I just feel really, really strongly there's such a need for both.
Mhm.
So super, super exciting that this is coming to fruition and it's so needed, but don't, I know a lot of people who really benefit from the group piece. So cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I saw John has his hand up.
Hi, thank you. This is exactly what I think I was expecting. Couple in the weed questions, as some people in the chat have put out there. Looking further ahead, support employment services no longer falling under the SPAL.
Mhm.
Would this particular service be considered part of that support employment service, or would this be considered more of a day habish type of service for the SLS waiver? And also just in terms of the DD caps, would this count towards the 4,800 for day hab, or would this be in the 7,112 for SE?
Yeah, great questions. I was feeling super confident about how well I was going to be able to answer it until you got to the DD waiver. So I'll start with the SPAL. Maybe I should end with the SPAL so I feel better. So with respect to the SPAL, and we have a slide on this later, so I'll sort of reiterate this for folks, but as part of moving supported employment services outside of the SPAL, we're defining that as sort of everything under the umbrella of employment services. So that would be both sort of individual job coaching and job development, and the new benefits planning and workplace assistance, that all of those services related to sort of working independently would go live elsewhere and just be in their own little land where you can have as many of them as you need.
Awesome answer. Thank you.
Yeah, see, great. I was like, oh, wow, I can't wait for
Now the DD waiver.
Now the DD waiver, great question. Maybe Jenny has a better answer to this. I, for my part, have not, I wasn't thinking about it as within either of those caps, but I don't know that that's the right way to think about it, or if there are more considerations. So my answer is, great point. We're writing that down and we'll get back to you next stakeholder meeting. But Jenny, if you've thought more deeply about this or have more answers, definitely chime in.
Yeah, I don't have a ton more to answer, but just say yes, that's definitely been on our radar. I think a lot of, with where we're at in this process, we still have some steps to go, like that rate development piece, any cost neutrality pieces. We're going to have to still run through all of that before we might be able to answer those questions. But again, we want it to be as available as we can make it. But there might be some funding limitations that might cause there to be a unit limit or things of that nature.
Thank you very much.
I just want to speak really quickly to the rate methodology point from Jody. I saw it pop up in the chat. And so, like, to recap, if people are not seeing that in the chat, essentially that from a rates perspective, the percent of time that that a staff person might be billable is going to be very different if they're providing line of sight supervision, let's say, and they're like going to one place, staying there all day, billable essentially all day and going home, versus someone who's sort of bebopping around supporting a lot of folks, and that could impact the rate. So I think that's really great feedback, and also a great example of when we were talking with our rates team, they were like, the more input you can give us from providers about the sort of practicalities of delivering the service, the better we can develop an effective rate. And so we have that feedback captured in the chat. We'll definitely bring it back to them. And as Jenny mentioned, we may do a separate stakeholder meeting with our rates team to be like, come talk to us about what we need to be thinking about while we're doing the rate setting. And then I feel like I thought a hand was up.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I just saw another question. I'm just gonna keep answering chat questions because it's hard for me to be quiet if that wasn't very obvious. So if there's someone going to each place during the day to provide the service, is transportation included or an option? So this is sort of how we're thinking about transportation right now. So for one, because this is a job related, you can use non-medical transportation still, but sort of recognizing that from like an individual, like a one person providing one person transportation, that is not necessarily always financially super viable to bill under non-medical transportation. If you were providing, I think line of sight is sort of the best example, right? Like in order for this person to get to work, a person needs to be with them, and the service that they are providing for them during that transportation is workplace assistance, right? Because it's still getting them to the job, it's meeting the supervision requirement. And so in that instance, you could start in our current sort of proposed version, you could start billing for workplace assistance sort of at the time that that person picked someone up for work. But sort of outside of the actual individual receiving services and their transportation to and from work, it would be similar to other services that you wouldn't be able to bill for like travel time for like if the staff person's just going to work, gonna hang out with the person there for a little while and go back, then transportation would not be included, but should be factored into the rate development, to Jody's point. That was a very wordy answer to your question, so please let me know if, if you would like me to clarify.
Hey, Kim, this is Katie again. Thanks for that. Thanks for answering all these questions. I just wondered if I could take a second to do a little follow-up from John's question. And
Yeah.
just to see John and anybody else here on the call, with as far as the unit for the developmental disabilities waiver, the unit limit, I'm just curious to know if you see that as something that will come up a lot, because we would love to be able to speak to that, like how it might look, and just wondered about, do you see that people running up against that often?
Hi, it's John again. If it was considered under the 4,800 unit cap, then it would be something that I'm sure some of our folks would run up against. The 7,112 cap that includes day hab plus SE services is pretty darn liberal in my eyes, and we rarely have any concern if we're heading towards that. But if you count this as kind of like just general supervision and support, just happens to be at another site, but it kind of looks more like day hab kind of supports, and we count it under 4,800, I could see that having an impact on people.
Excellent. That's really helpful to know, because the more we can consider that and think about it, you know, how it will happen in each person's life, that'll be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, and I think just sort of, I appreciate you bringing us back to that, Katie, because the other thing at least for me, as I'm thinking about this question, you know, the intent, right, for folks on the SLS waiver of removing the services from this fall is that that these caps shouldn't limit somebody's ability to go to work. And so we would obviously then hate for like it to turn around and accidentally cause that problem on the DD waiver as we're fixing it on the SLS waiver. So I just appreciate that contribution to the conversation. A thing I'm working on in my life is counting silently in my head to give people space to talk, but I always interrupt my silent counting to tell people that's what I'm doing. So I know that a few folks mentioned they had more sort of in the weeds questions. We have probably 15 minutes or so left before we have a few other slides to close things out. But we do have some more time, and if there aren't other sort of big picture questions or big picture feedback about sort of the direction that we're thinking about things, like let's try the weeds. Tom.
Hey, thank you. Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. So I'm just going to put these out here, knowing that you're probably not going to be able to answer, right? But it's the things that I start thinking about when I think about how are we going to do this? How will this look? You know, and I think I totally get where you guys are going, right? I think you're between a rock and a hard place on this one, because you essentially have what you're describing as a supervision skill, not really a job support. It's necessary for the job to be successful, but it's not related to the job. It's related to the individual. And so maybe that comes in at a little bit a lesser rate, right? But then when you think about what you're asking somebody to do, right? And I think Jody kind of hit on this, right? It's very different if somebody's like, hey, I'm going to hire a person and you're going to support this person on this job site on Mondays and Tuesdays at this such time. That's concrete. Somebody can make a choice, right? And it would probably fall more in lines with our normal considerations with regard to, you know, what somebody would want to be paid to do that work, right? But as soon as you get into the, hey, I've got to cobble a group together for you, it's going to be, you know, a half hour here, then you're going to drive downtown here, and then, oh my gosh, it might be a Saturday at 11 o'clock at night because it's an overnight shift, right? Or whatever it is that you're doing. Boy, people don't, when you start talking about jobs, right? And this is true for teams as well as individuals, as well as the people who support them. Jobs happen every day of the week, every hour of the day, right? And if something works for somebody, and we've had folks who would work the evening shift, so they would regularly start at 2 p.m, and it would end when it was over. And oftentimes that was after midnight, right? And so having people picked up and come home and being able to kind of figure all that stuff out, that's a different beast altogether. And people just aren't likely going to do that for a low wage, right? That's a pretty significant thing. So I don't know how you like make that work, right? But that would be one of the things I'd want you guys to be considering, that it's not just a skill base, but logistically, how does this work, right? And that goes into my next in the weeds question, which is going to be what I heard you say was that, hey, job coaching could happen at the same time, and it might be by the same company or it might be by a different company. And so I just want to get clarification on that, because I'm thinking like, oh, so it's going to be okay to have 2 waiver services being billed at the same time, right? Because we kind of have this in our personal care world as well. If there's 2 separate agencies providing a support, we have to have communication with that other agency. We have to have it delineated out. Our agency's doing this part, your agency's doing that part, so that there isn't any double billing going on. Is it going to be that kind of format where if there are other agencies involved, there's going to have to be coordination at the agency level to ensure what's happening when, so that there isn't double billing happening? That just kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with your second point, since as you said, the first one is a little more challenging. So yeah, just to clarify from that slide in general, what I meant to convey is that the same individual could be receiving both services, and that it could be the same agency or different agencies, but it's still same issue that you're talking about. It still couldn't be billed simultaneously, as far as I know. And so it would, if it was different agencies, it would require coordination between those agencies. For me, it feels like it's a balance between like individual choice and like the sort of expediency of delivering the services, right? Like if it was me, if I was a member, I would probably want the same provider providing both, but maybe their employment provider doesn't provide workplace assistance and they really need it and they need to work with someone else. So we were just sort of trying to convey that we aren't going to put any limit on like it needs to be the same provider or it can't be the same provider or anything like that. But it would, as you're saying, require, if it is two different providers, a lot of that communication and coordination, which even separate and aside from the billing would probably be the case just to make sure everybody's on the same page about like what's happening at work. Your first point is a great one. And I do think that's, it sort of is the follow-on, right, to the workforce concern. It's okay, this is all good in theory, but like who's gonna actually do this job and what would it take to get someone to do that job? So just sort of similar to my response to Jody's comment, I think that kind of feedback and those kind of examples are exactly what we need to bring to our rates team so that they can do their best to take those things into account. And I'm gonna resist the urge to try and like spitball creative things about how we can think about that. I'm gonna do that in my noggin.
Yeah, I certainly didn't want to put you on the spot with that. Like I fully understand that that's complicated, right? That's and I would just say that part of, because I've contemplated this practice as well as another practice that I wanted to implement and haven't really had traction with, but the idea of coworker support, right? And the fact that while we really ask a lot of the people that we employ to be trained up on all these things, right? Requires a lot of certifications before they can go do something. And what might make this easier to do logistically is if we don't require the same level, like we take this situationally. I absolutely am not advocating for untrained people or putting people in danger, but to take a look at what do we need to have this person go through, because I think I could probably get a lot of success if somebody could just do it with minimal training that we could do mostly online, right? And then have them be able to meet with somebody beforehand and all that good stuff, right? There's just a lot of different things that you could adjust on that scenario that doesn't necessarily impact the rate of pay, which could make that easier for somebody to digest and go, okay, that makes sense, right? Like, yeah, I could do that.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, Tom, are you talking about I heard you say coworker support, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. Like if you were able to, you mean like a coworker at the place of employment of the individual getting support, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so love all of that, great. And one thing that we talked about as a team was sort of like, could we try and build coworker supports like into this initial proposal? And with the timeline, et cetera, we felt like not this round, but like, let's keep talking about it. And then can we do amendments to sort of add that in if we need to? Precisely because, like you said, it would probably, in order to be successful, involve like maybe different training requirements, maybe different payment structure, or I don't know. But that is something that we want to look at and see if we can implement as sort of like a next step in the growth of workplace assistance as a service once we get sort of this initial one off the ground, or this initial launch, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. And like I said, I just wanted to get it out there as points of subjects to think about and how everybody thinks about rates first, right? And I think there's other things that can make that more appealing to people as well, not just the pay, right? But the pay is going to be a thing for sure.
Of course. Okay, I've seen a few questions in the chat, so I'm gonna pop over and answer those since I don't see any other hand raised. Real quick, I just want to acknowledge Jennifer's point about the fact that when a need comes about isn't always predictable. Again, I think that's like one of the big sort of challenging questions about like, okay, great, let's say we successfully develop this service. CMS is like, wow, Colorado, you're geniuses. I'm so proud of you. Now it's available. Okay, well, now we want to help this person go to work who has support needs that are unpredictable. Like, how do we actually accomplish that? I think, to be like very honest, I think it will probably take a lot of creativity from this community and idea sharing and, you know, like group technical assistance, because I do think it's going to be tricky, and I think it will depend, right, on where you are and what other needs that person has, and what other needs, like if you as a provider, the other folks you're serving have, and how quickly you can be responsive if there is a need, and so on and so on and so on. So I just want to acknowledge how challenging that is to think about. I want to spend a minute talking about Jody's question about this interfacing with fading down of job coaching. Because that specifically is an area that I feel like our team has been talking about a lot, and there are differences of opinion about what that could look like. And initially, we wanted to try and tackle that today, and we felt like it was we had too many things that we wanted everybody's feedback on, and that it would sort of best be addressed in the next meeting. But big picture, sort of how at least I think about this interfacing with the fading of job coaching is, I'm just going to do this via hypotheticals, right? So let's say I, waiver member, go get a job. I'm like super pumped, and I have my job coach, and they're going to come with me, and they're coming to my orientation. They're hanging out with me full time for my like first week of training, let's say. And I have some additional support needs, but my job coach is there anyway, and so sort of incidental to their job coaching, they're able to provide those supports because I genuinely need them there for job coaching, right? Okay, now time goes on, I'm increasingly independent in my job. I don't need as much job coaching, but my like support needs haven't changed, right? So in my mind, there's these like charts. My background is making my hands disappear. That's not helpful. In my mind, it's like, okay, if job coaching is going like this, right, and gradually coming down, but my physical support needs, let's say, are up here, then as this is coming down, workplace assistance is maybe fading up until fading up, doesn't make any sense, ramping up until I am sort of stable in my job and I have whatever sort of level of ongoing job coaching that I'm going to need in order to maintain my employment. And then workplace assistance has sort of like backfilled whatever other physical support needs I might have or supervision needs I might have. Again, I realize that's very sort of like idealized, right? That will sort of like perfectly match these things. But that is sort of like how I'm thinking about it, is that like job coaching and the need for job coaching should be assessed sort of based on how comfortable someone is in their job, how much training, coaching, support they need, and that if there are other support needs that sort of exceed that amount of support or are outside the scope of that support, that then you would add workplace assistance in to fill in those gaps. That was a lot of talking without visual support from slides. So I'm just gonna say, please chime in if that like wasn't quite what you were looking for, and also preview that I think a big focus of the next stakeholder meeting is going to be like, okay, so what's the difference between job coaching and workplace assistance? And then how do we actually do this in real life, and what ideas do we have, and what elements of the service design itself might be barriers to doing what we would need to do in order to actually implement. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second in case, Jody, you want to chime in at all with if I'm on the right track.
I think you're on the right track on the sort of global sense. I think from a in the weeds portion, we could put some things in place that could either make that a potential nightmare, or could streamline the process, right? And to Jennifer's point, you know, I think we need to be cautious here that if this is really intended to be a lower reimbursed than job coaching service, I just think we're going to need to be really deliberate to make sure that we're not making it more complex than it needs to be. Yeah, for today, that's probably good enough.
Yeah. That's great feedback. And I appreciate the framing of like globally as in the weeds, this could be a nightmare, because I do think that's sort of the challenge. And I think what I'm hoping, and it seems like this is what we're doing and that's great. And I'm like so happy that you're all here and providing this input, because I think we've been getting bogged down in those weedsy questions. But before we sort of like get lost in those for a little while and work through those with all of you, we want to get like the check marks of like, yes, globally, this makes sense to me. Globally, big picture, yes, that's the need. Yes, I think this meets that need. Okay, now as we're really talking about like implementation and rates and all of these things, like let's not make decisions or design things in a way that interferes with that like global big picture goal and success, if that makes sense. And then I saw Jennifer's regular review. Yeah, I know Jody, you just pointed to that too, but I do think this is also, I'll just make a quick plug for, this is where I think it interfaces with ACRE training, right? And the sort of the training and reimbursement that we're offering, which normally we have a slide to plug, but I didn't think we would have time, so I didn't include one. Okay, great. We have 5 minutes left. I have a few more slides. Does anybody have like any other like quick feedback thoughts before I sort of close things out? All right. Well, moving on then to other changes. Thank you all for the discussion. We're just going to wrap up with a few other updates, and then Jenny gave a preview for this, which is going to be a real test of my Zoom skill that is somehow still not sufficient after all this time. We do have a little survey that we're going to send out to just try and capture who was here and capture a little more feedback from everyone, because I failed at setting up polls correctly, so we couldn't do polls in the meeting. So with that, on to a few other updates to close us out. The first is that when Jenny mentioned some of these earlier, so the buy-in program for the DD waiver is being put in place by our partners in the eligibility department. So it's not being managed directly by our employment team, but we're working closely with them on it. And that is set to be effective on January 1st, which is so close. And I know that's something that a lot of our folks are eagerly awaiting. So exciting news. The second, we talked about this earlier, but we're also in the process of removing supported employment services from the service plan authorization limit, or the SPAL, for people on the SLS waiver. And per the sort of guidance of the legislation, where that should be effective on July 1, which is also not that far away, but it is far. I get it. But we're getting there and we're excited. Hence our these guys, fireworks. There we go. John.
With the Medicaid buy-in, which I am so excited about, between that and the ABLE accounts, or all of a sudden we've got a path where people can actually earn money and accumulate money and not be limited to poverty. Yet we still have families that will be hesitant about moving forward with employment far too fast if that Social Security benefit goes down to zero. And again, they work so hard to get somebody set up into Social Security, and then again saying, well, the economy is booming right now, everybody's looking for employees, we can get you a job and you can kiss that Social Security goodbye. It'll be okay, don't worry about the next recession when you're laid off. and then you have 0 income. Is there any interaction between the buy-in program and Social Security caps? And I don't know, just anything on that.
Great question. That definitely exceeds my specific knowledge in the area of benefits. Jenny, I don't know if you have anything to add about that from the benefits planning side. I will say one of our sort of goals, because we anticipated there might be some questions about the buy-in program, is that we're sort of collecting the questions that people have, bringing it back to our buy-in team to develop like an FAQs document about buy-in specifically. And so I think we can definitely incorporate that if none of us know the answer, which I think is possibly the case.
Yeah, I would have said the same thing, Kim.
Okay.
So thank you John, thank you for raising the question, because I think painting the picture of where exactly are those bottlenecks is really helpful for us to take questions back and to keep pondering the interactions of a lot of these complex things.
Thanks.
All right. Whoops. Oh, God. I tried to be too smart. I thought I could multitask. It was a terrible error. All right. I'm putting in the chat right now our survey because I know we're coming very close to time. All right. Last couple of things. Our next 2 meetings are going to be Tuesday, October 25th, 1 to 2:30, and then Thursday, November 10th, 1 to 2:30. The slides, like we said, will be available so you can access this link directly. There's also our stakeholder engagement page, and these will go out as reminders in the OCL updates from Mr. John Barry. We've talked a lot about sort of like what we hope the focus will be, so I'm not going to get into that again, but I hope that most all of you will be there as well as we sort of continue to work together to build something that's going to work for us. And for contact info, again, this will be on the slides. Feel free to take it down now. This is my email and Jenny's. Jenny's the one leading the development of all of these services. So if you have questions or you think of additional feedback you'd like to share, this is how you can get in touch with us. We welcome any, if you're like, wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, duh, then you can email us in the middle of the night, it's fine. Or later, you should rest. Okay. That's us.
Did you see, hey Kim, real quick, did you
Yeah.
see that the Google form needs to be like turned on to the permission needs to be given away?
Oh no. Oh no. Okay, I'm gonna stop share because otherwise I can never figure this out. Because I'm in some kind of presentation mode, but I think I can turn it on. Let's see. I was so proud of myself for making this Google form so fast because I didn't realize I messed up the poll questions.
It was super impressive.
Let's see here. Settings. Make this a quiz? No. Says accepting responses. Sorry, now everybody's sitting here while I try to figure this out. That's not good. All right, I know we're at time, so people have to hop off. Totally get that. Thank you again for being here. We can also, I have a few minutes if there are people with more questions that want to stay on while I try and figure out permissions.
Yeah, so feel free to jump off if you need to. Veronica, I saw your question in the chat about, is there a link to the statewide changes? And like, not exactly. So as Kim mentioned, we do have things posted on the supported employment website through HCPF. That speaks to, you'll have this presentation and slides and things. I want to say in relation to the waiver buy-in, there's some informational memos or operational memos that exist. So we can work to kind of collate those to make sure that it's readily available to kind of this group.
I don't know if it's going to let everybody get it. Well, shoot. Okay, well, we're going to set up polls for the next meeting and we'll get your feedback that way then. Dang, I was very proud and now I failed at technology at the end. All right, cool. Well, thank you everyone. Have a great day. I'm going to hang on for another minute or two in case people have questions. And yeah, see you soon.
Hey, Rachel, while you're still on, real quick, can I get your email address?
Sure. Yeah, I just shared it in the chat. Sorry, guys, I've been
Oh,
kind of
did you? I'm
listening
sorry.
in.
Oh, it is right there. I'm
That's
sorry.
okay. There it is again. Yeah.
Awesome.
If you have any questions about what we do or would like to chat further, absolutely, please do reach out.
Yeah, that's exciting. Thank you. We will.
Thanks, Katie. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, I see people hopping off, so I'm gonna stop recording. Thanks, everyone.